think we can look to Esther for a little bit of hope here. So the book of Esther is in the Old Testament. It's relatively close to the beginning. If you have hit Psalms, you've gone too far, go back to the left. And if you are in Nehemiah, it's the book right after. So it goes Nehemiah, then Esther. So I'm just going to skim through. So chapter 1, here's what happens. There's this queen. Her name is Queen Vashti, and she is married to this man named Xerxes. And he's the king. Xerxes is kind of a jerk. Xerxes is a jerkses. Sorry. And so I know it's embarrassing. You guys miss me, right? He decides that like he makes all these decrees, and he is not a nice guy, and he's being influenced by other really not nice guys. And he comes to the point and he's like, bring me my wife, blah, blah, blah. And he's not in a good mindset. And Vashti is like, no, like I'm not your thing. I'm not your property. You don't get to just order me to, go here and there. That doesn't go well for Xerxes, or for Vashti. She gets kicked out. She is no longer the queen because she has defied Xerxes. Xerxes made a very clear statement about what he wanted to have happen. Vashti said nope, and now Vashti is no Mashti. So chapter 2. Xerxes is angry and he wants a new queen. So he finally calms down enough, and the bad people who have been influencing him are still influencing him. And so they all come up with this plan of, okay, we're going to find Xerxes the king. We're going to find him the most perfect woman in the world. She's got to be beautiful. She's got to be smart. She's got to be all of these things. And she's going to be his new wife. And this is the part where I personally start really identifying with that. I'm kidding. This is not why I identify with Esther. Not because I'm the most beautiful woman in the world, even if I am. No. It's because Esther had no business being anybody's queen. Esther was a Jew. That made no sense for them to pick a Jewish woman to be the queen. But she was so beautiful and enthralling and had all of these things. And it turns out, so she gets sent to go and be part of like the king's court kind of thing. And Xerxes ends up loving her more than all of the other women who have been brought to him. And he decides he wants to make her his wife. So that's all fine and well. But then we move on to chapter 3. Esther's the queen. She has this uncle named Mordecai who sits at the city gate, and he kind of just overhears stuff. He sees all the things that are going on. He encounters this guy named Haman, who is one of the bad guys who's been influencing Xerxes. And Haman has a plot to annihilate all of the Jewish people in the kingdom. Now, mind you, at this point, they still don't really know that Esther is a Jew, but they're going to find out. And so Mordecai goes to her and he tells her, to Esther, he gets word to her and he's like, hey, this guy Haman, who Xerxes trusts, he has this plan. He's going to annihilate all of the Jews. And guess what? That's going to include you. And even if it doesn't include you, you're going to have to watch your whole entire family, all of your people die if you don't do something about it. And so chapter 4 is where things start getting really, really real. Esther learns of Haman's plot, and Mordecai sends word to Esther. And in verses 13 through 14, this is the verse. These are the verses that my mom started praying for me when I was 12. And these are the verses that I pray for you guys now. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you and the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So Mordecai says to Esther, who knows whether you have attained royalty for such a time as this? And this makes absolutely no sense, right? Because Esther is just this like young, beautiful woman who is all of a sudden finds herself the queen of this nation and the object of a king's affection. And now she is in this position where she might have the opportunity to risk her own life to save her people's. Because we saw what happened to Vashti before. She didn't make it out of her defiance of King Xerxes. Everybody knows what happened to her, but here Esther is faced with the same exact situation where she can either go and do the right thing and stare down the barrel of a very mean king's desire, or she can stay quiet and either watch her people be annihilated or saved by somebody else. And Mordecai says to her, and who knows whether or not you have attained royalty for such a time as this. So the essence of this story is that each of us, who knows whether or not you have attained royalty for such a time as this. Each of us is royal in our own right, thanks to becoming children of the King. And that's like one of those kind of mind-blowing things when we consider that not only do we have a Savior, but we have a King. And not only did that King save us, but he made us part of his family. He adopted us in as one of his own children. He is our Abba Father. He is our Father. He looks at us, at each one of you, and sees his child. He doesn't see some stranger who's an inconvenience. He doesn't see some person who just kind of, wanders here and there, and sometimes he cares about, sometimes he doesn't. No, he looks at you and sees his child, for whom he would and has given everything. And he's bestowed upon you the royal title, child of the King. And so those words that Mordecai asks Esther, I think it's important for us to be asking each other when we're facing these difficult times, when these things don't make sense, when we feel like if only it had happened to somebody else. We've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it again right now. Frodo and Gandalf, when Frodo says that he wishes the ring had not come to him in his time, because if it hadn't come to him in his time, then he wouldn't have to be dealing with it. And Gandalf says, so do all who live to see such times, but it is not for them to decide. The only thing that is for them to decide is what to do with the time that is given to them. And the time that has been given to us is this. The time that has been given to Esther was an evil dude plotting to kill all of her people. And sure, this could have happened 6 months and a year before when Vashti was still the queen, and it would never have been Esther's problem because Esther wouldn't have been anybody. But no, this happened at the exact time that Esther rose to the rank of queen, the only person who might have a shot at changing Xerxes' mind, despite the fact that his last queen tried to change his mind about something and she was killed for it. Now, Esther goes boldly before Xerxes in chapter 7. And what do you think Xerxes does? The story would be really, really garbage if he did the same thing to Esther that he did to Vashti. That's not what he does. No. His heart is softened because of his love for her, because of her obedience to God, because of her obedience to her uncle who implored her to do the right thing, because of her desire to save somebody else, even if it meant sacrificing herself. Because Esther had every reason to believe that as soon as she walked into that throne room and said to Xerxes, hey, I'm Jewish. Your best friend wants to kill all of my people. That includes me. What are you going to do about it? She had every reason to believe that Xerxes was going to say, all right, bye, I'll find another wife. Because that's what he did before. But no. In her obedience, in her humility, in her kindness, he heard her. He took heed of what she said, and he changed his mind. It goes on in chapter 7. We see that Haman, the bad guy, is hanged. He's gonna be dead now. So yeah, this whole thing, all of this happens because Esther became the queen. The Jews were saved because this was not the time when the Jews were meant to be annihilated. There was another Xerxes several years later who he was going to do some bad stuff, but no, at this point, it was not in God's plan for the Jews to suffer in this way. And so it turns out that Xerxes then decides that he wants to protect Jews because he loves his wife so much that he doesn't want anything to happen to her people. And it's just this wonderful story that ends really nicely. Not many stories in the Bible do get to end so nicely. This one ends really, really nicely. And we see yet another example of God using somebody in a difficult situation and proving to them that it's not about how difficult our situation is that defines us. What defines us is how faithful we are to seeking the will of God in these difficult situations. How faithful we are in saying, God, did I become royal for such a time as this? Did I become a child of the King for such a time as this? And I guarantee you that you did. Each one of you, it's no accident that you are where you are. It's no accident that you're feeling what you're feeling, because all of that informs, who you will become. But like any difficult circumstance, we can either be defined by it by succumbing to it, or we can define the circumstance by overcoming it. And each of you has a unique opportunity to overcome this desperate situation by continuing to pursue